we're getting reports from city after city around the world, but now we've got 5 cities in America that have done universal basic income programs. This is where people just, low income, poor people just randomly selected. I mean, literally randomly selected. Usually when they do this, they'll take like 300 people and they'll randomly select 150 of them to get the money and 150 to get no money, but to be followed, and to be kept track of. And then, that's their control group and they can see what the outcome of the result is. We're seeing in city after city these tests going on. And what we're finding is this is from Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore. Universal basic income programs are proving successful. By the way, the largest experiment of this kind was one that we did at a national level with every child in America. And that was the American Rescue Plan in 2021 that Joe Biden passed that had this $3,000 a year child tax credit. Remember that? It just expired a couple months ago. I'm guessing, particularly if you have kids, you remember it. And what this did is it cut child poverty in the United States by more than half. We went from 12% of kids living in poverty to, I'm sorry, that was in Denver. We went from 12.2% of kids living in poverty in the United States to 5.4%. So what this shows is, and these universal basic income studies too, what they show over and over and over again is that if you give somebody $500, $1,000, $1,500 a month with no strings attached, the Republican prediction had always been, they're going to go out and use that money to get high, or they're just going to become lazy, right? You give people free money, they turn into lazy slobs. They don't do anything. They just, they sit around and eat bonbons while they're watching soap operas on TV. That's the Republican story about what happens with universal basic income. But now we've got study after study after study showing that no, when you lift people up above the poverty level to a certain threshold, which is basically now I've got enough money to live a decent life. The car isn't constantly breaking down, the rent can be paid, there's enough food on the table, just the basic stuff. The high end of poverty, right? Or the low end of the American middle class or working class. That when you get people to that point, they take the next steps themselves. If you can give them, there's one article that was in Business Insider that started out with the story of a woman who was getting $600 a month from, one of these programs. I believe it was the Baltimore program. And she used that money to buy a car, which is what she needed to have a job. And then with the car and the job, suddenly she's able to provide for her 3 kids, and she's, not on welfare anymore, and she's got a job, and she's doing good, all because of universal basic income, because something just lifted her above that ceiling. It lifted her above the barrier to normal life that poverty presents. Now, this tells us a bunch of things. By the way, back to the child tax credit that Biden passed with the American Rescue Act in 2021. What that proves, first of all, it proved that you could reduce poverty in America by half. That poverty is just a choice in the United States. It proved that, number one. But number two, what it proves is that there is a threshold someplace. Now, granted, those people are now back in poverty because the Republicans refused to renew that child tax credit. It was a big deal for them. They didn't want, anybody, much less poor people, getting free government money that might be paid for with taxes from billionaires. The other thing that this experiment showed was that if you can get people up to a certain point, they will launch themselves into life, into good, productive, life in America. Now, Republicans say, whoa, wait a minute, if you give people things, for nothing, they don't value them. Well, that might be true if you give somebody a fancy car as opposed to just a car. That might be true, with your hobbies. If parents buy kids expensive toys and hobbies constantly, that the kids just don't value them. Yeah, there's some truth to that. But there's no truth to it at all when it comes to basic income that is used to maintain a standard of living that's purely functional. Food, housing, these are necessities. You're going to value them no matter how you got them. And what this shows is how behind America is. We are the only country in the world, developed country in the world, that doesn't give everybody in our country health insurance or health care at a low cost, at an affordable rate. We are literally the only developed country in the world where 500,000 people lose their homes and declare bankruptcy every year because somebody got sick. It literally does not exist anywhere else in the developed world. Why? Because Republicans here in the United States have been telling us for decades now, all the way back to 1935 when they started telling us this about Social Security, that when you give somebody something for nothing, they don't value it, and it makes them lazy. They said this about Social Security. They said this about Medicare. They said this about Obamacare. Remember that back in 2010, all those, the Tea Party and all the ads and everything else? They said this about Medicaid. They said this about food stamps. They said this about Section 8 housing. They said this about free college. They said this about, good quality primary education. Republicans have said this, you can't give people things for free because it makes them lazy. They've said this about pretty much any program that helps average working people. And they know they're lying. How do I know that Republicans know that they're lying? Because if they really and truly believed that giving people something for nothing makes them lazy, damages them, hurts them, which is what they've been preaching to us since 1935, for 80 years now. If they really believed that, then the Republicans would be at the front of the line arguing for a 100% inheritance tax so that we didn't inflict a fate worse than death, being turned into a lazy person on the children of wealthy people. If the billionaires who run and own the Republican Party actually believed that giving people something for nothing was a bad thing, was a destructive thing, shattered the human experience, destroyed the human spirit, de-incentivized or disincentivized people from work, if they really and truly believed that, none of them would be passing their wealth to their kids. But instead, all of them are passing their wealth to their kids because they all know it's a lie. They know that the Republicans have been lying about this forever. So what do? We've got these programs that are incredibly successful and that can solve poverty in the United States. It doesn't have to be universal basic income. There's a dozen different ways to get people up above poverty. You can do it with minimum wage laws. You can do it with widespread unionization. You've got European countries where 70, 80, 90% of the population, the working population, is in a union. And they pretty much don't have poverty or homelessness. There's a bunch of different ways we can do this. We can, as I said, there's the whole social safety net. There are tax credits. I mean, we did this with kids, right? With the child tax credit, unionization, government programs keyed to food stamps. We could expand those. We could expand government subsidized housing. In some countries, like in Austria, I think about a third of the housing now in Vienna is government subsidized. They're doing just fine, thank you very much. It's not making Austrians lazy. Unemployment benefits so that people don't fall through the cracks. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this. But the bottom line is these experiments are proving to us that, number one, poverty is a choice. Number one, poverty is a choice. And number two, that we can solve this. We can do it, without a great deal of expense. Or, maybe we should just say, okay, Republicans, we'll believe you, and we're going to put 100% tax on inheritances. to save those wealthy people's kids.